Shadow Home Secretary Philp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. The government has now been in office for well over a year. And I think, I think it's fair to say not even their kindest friends would say they think it has gone very well. But listening to her statement, it sounds like she thinks everything is fine, and if there are any problems, it's all somehow somebody else's fault. Is she living in a parallel universe? After over a year in office, she must now take responsibility for what is happening under this government. Now, it's very interesting during her statement, Mr. Speaker, to notice she did not mention her favourite phrase from a year or so ago, that she was going to smash the gangs. I wonder why she was so silent on her previously favourite catchphrase. Well, the answer is it's not going very well. Now, she mentions National Crime Agency disruptions. Let me gently point out that 84% of those National Crime Agency disruptions that she cited a few minutes ago are classified as not being high impact. And if we look at National Crime Agency arrests for organised immigration crime, they actually went down by 16% in the last financial year, hardly smashing the gangs. And in fact, the NCA's arrests for organised immigration crime in that financial year were only 26, a drop in the ocean compared to the tens of thousands crossing the Channel. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was also rather conspicuous that the Home Secretary did not mention at all, not even a word, about the numbers illegally crossing the English Channel. Now, I wonder why that was. I wonder why she forgot to say a single word about that. Well, the reason, I'm afraid, is pretty clear. Because far from smashing the gangs, so far this year, 29,000, to be precise, 29,003 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel. That is the worst year in history, and it is up by 38% compared to last year. That is not success, it is failure. Things are not getting any better, they are getting worse. This government is failing, and everyone can see it. That is why there are protests up and down the country, and where those protests are peaceful, I support them. That is why, this is a shocking figure, 75%, let this sink in, 75% of the public think the government is handling immigration and asylum badly. 75%. Now, let me turn to hotels. Now, in the 9 months before the last general election, 200 hotels were closed down, including the Bell Hotel in Epping. But since 200 hotels closed down, but since the election, the numbers in asylum hotels have actually gone up by 8%. Now, had that previous trend of closures continued, today there would be no asylum hotels open at all. But I asked the Home Secretary to confirm this. Will she confirm that she will not reduce hotel usage simply by shunting asylum seekers from hotels and into flats and HMOs, which are desperately needed by young people? Will she give the House that categoric assurance? Now, Mr. Speaker, last week the Home Secretary's lawyers said that the rights of illegal immigrants are more important than the rights of local people in places like Epping. And when this was expressly put in those terms to the Education Secretary yesterday on the Trevor Phillips programme, in those words, she shamefully agreed. Those statements are a disgrace. Does the Home Secretary realise how angry that makes people feel? It speaks of a government not on the side of the people in this country. It means the government appears to care more about the rights of illegal immigrants than our own citizens. So will she apologise for what her lawyers and the Education Secretary said? And will she undertake that ministers and their lawyers will never say that again? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talks about her returns deal with France. Now, it has been reported that it will only return about 50 people a week. amounting to 6% of arrivals. Does she accept that allowing 94% of illegal arrivals to stay will act as no deterrent at all? Does she accept that? And if she doesn't accept this figure of 50 a week, will she tell the House exactly how many immigrants crossing the Channel will in fact be returned under her deal? Now, she may recall that back in July, we were told by the government that the first returns would happen within weeks. That was back in July. Will she confirm to the House that the number who have actually been returned so far is precisely 0? Now, she also said to the House a couple of minutes ago that there would be security checks on those people reciprocally taken from France into the UK. But will she confirm that her agreement with France expressly says the French government will not provide the UK government with any information at all, any personal data about those migrants? So if there are criminal convictions, if there are suspicions about extremism or terrorism, the French government will not provide information to us. And if that is true, as her agreement says, how can she possibly conduct security checks? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talked about tweaks to family visa rules. Let me be clear about the opposition's position on this. If someone enters this country illegally, they should not be allowed to bring in any family members. In fact, everybody entering this country illegally should be immediately removed to their country of origin, if possible, and if not possible, to a safe third country such as Rwanda, a scheme which she cancelled just days before it was due to start. The public expects that approach. The public expects that approach, an approach which she cancelled, because the numbers crossing the Channel so far this year have been the worst ever, the worst in history. And it's not just the numbers are high. Hundreds of migrants having crossed, living in those hotels, have been charged with criminal offences, including sexual assaults on girls as young as 8 years old and multiple rapes. This is not just a border security crisis, it is a public safety crisis as well, and people up and down this country are furious. That is why they are protesting, and that is why 75% of the public think this government is failing on asylum and immigration. Now, if this government were serious about fixing this problem, they would know that little tweaks here and there are not enough. Tweaks to Article 8 are not going to be enough. Tweaking the family reunion rules are not enough. Returning, maybe if we're lucky, 50 people a week to France is not going to be enough. Maybe intercepting a few boats, worthy though that is, it is not going to be enough. The only way these crossings will stop, the only way we're going to get control of our borders back, is if everybody crossing the Channel knows they will get returned. Now, we tabled a bill to do that in Parliament a few weeks ago. We had a plan to do that, the Rwanda bill. We need to go further by disapplying the Human Rights Act, not just tinkering with Article 8, disapplying the entire Human Rights Act from immigration matters. If the government was serious, that is what they will do. So I have one last question for the Home Secretary. If she really wants to control our borders, if she really wants to get down the record numbers that have been crossing on her watch, she would back our plan, she would disapply the Human Rights Act in its entirety from immigration matters, and she would ensure that every single person crossing the Channel was immediately removed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do worry about the Shadow Home Secretary's amnesia. And the 14 years that his party was in government, in which they never managed to do any of the fantasy things that he claims. So coming back to the reality rather than the fantasy rhetoric that he said, he talked about the approach that his previous government was taking before the election. So it's worth reminding the House of what that approach was. Asylum decisions dropped by 70%. They effectively had a freeze on taking asylum decisions, and they were returning those asylum seekers nowhere. Not to France, not to the safe countries that people had passed through, not to Rwanda, despite running the scheme for more than 2 years. Only 4 volunteers went at a cost of £700 million. Their approach left us with a backlog that was soaring, and had we continued with that totally failed approach, not taking asylum decisions, not returning people anywhere, there would have been tens of thousands more people in asylum accommodation, in asylum hotels across the country right now. That is the kind of chaos that his policies were heading towards, and that is the kind of chaos that he is promising again now. The House will remember his personal record, obviously, where small boat arrivals went up tenfold on his watch when he was an immigration minister, and where the less than 1,000 asylum seekers were in hotels by the time he became immigration minister, more than 20,000 by the time that he left. His new concern for local councils, well, he was the immigration minister who actually wrote to local authorities to tell them he was stopping the requirement for local authorities to agree to accommodation, saying, I have instead authorised providers to identify any suitable properties that they consider appropriate. So, Mr. Speaker, we agree with communities across the country that asylum hotels must all close. And I understand too why councils individually want to take action in their area. But I would say to the Shadow Home Secretary, a party that wants to be in government should have a proper plan for the whole country, not just promote a chaotic approach that ends up making it worse in lots of areas. But that actually is their record. The reason that we have asylum hotels in the first place is because they did no planning, they let Manston chaos get out of control, and both the Shadow Justice Minister, when he was Immigration Minister, as well as the Shadow Home Secretary, rushed around the country opening hotels instead of taking a practical, steady approach that gets to the heart of the problem, that reduces the asylum system, that strengthens our border security and tackles and reforms the appeals that are causing the huge delays now. And as the final point, Mr. Speaker, this government strongly believes that sex offenders should be banned from the asylum system altogether. That is why we have put those details into the Border Security Bill, a bill that his party has voted against time and again, is still resisting in the House of Lords, a bill which, if opposition parties supported us and worked with us, we could have that law on the statute book. We could have those stronger powers against sex offenders. We could have the stronger powers on counter-terrorism powers to go after criminal gangs. We could have the stronger powers in place to tackle the offences that are being committed in the Channel and across the country as well. The trouble is, what the party opposite is doing in opposition is actually an even worse version of what they did in government, ramping up the rhetoric with policies that would just make the chaos worse. This government will fix the chaos that we inherited and strengthen our border security for the sake of the whole country.